I'm one of the co-founders of Supernova, Supernova Women. I'm also the executive director. So Supernova, we were founded in November of 2015, and we are a group of women that works to empower people of color to become self-sufficient shareholders within the cannabis industry. We do that through networking. We do that. My co-founder, Andrea Unsworth, up here.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Unsworth. I came into the industry out of the corporate world, so I was a bond analyst at Moody's and worked at Bank of America, but prior to that, I transitioned into the cannabis industry. I was writing pieces about basically about bonds that were backed by cannabis taxes in Washington and Colorado, and became extremely interested in that and the finances behind it, and kind of made the transition, became an operator. I had a delivery service here in the East Bay. I've been a part of a number of organizations, including Women Grow, of course a co-founder of Supernova Women, and have kind of worn quite a few hats in the cannabis industry, which many of you who are entrepreneurs know that is just part of the role and part of what you sign up for. So today, I've transitioned more into consulting, so it is very nice to kind of be here in this setting, talking about an overview of what it's like to jump in the state of California if you are going to be starting a cannabis business. So this will be somewhat high level, just to give us all a starting point that we're all on the same page in terms of how the process works getting a license in California, or a permit. So starting just a little bit, we're all familiar with MALCRSA, we'll call it. So this is our regulatory system in California, and these are kind of the foundations or the rules behind what we then go through to be compliant and get a permit. So it places the protection of the public as its highest priority, of course. And one key thing in California that is very different from other states, it's all about the local jurisdiction. So if you are not making relationships with the city that you want to be in or the unincorporated county, I would argue that that's probably your first step in the state of California, because while Prop 64 does apply to the entire state, every city is allowed to do it the way that they want. So that is probably a very an important key step. So what is commercial cannabis activity? It is cultivation, possession, manufacturing, distribution, all of these things of cannabis and cannabis products. It does not cover personal use cultivation, which a lot of folks get a little confused about, because we are allowed to do at minimum 6 plants, and then it depends on where you live. It may be even more stricter than that. But in terms of your personal use and what you can grow within your private residence, that is completely separate from commercial cannabis activity. It's only once you take that cannabis, you want to actually enter it into the marketplace and have other folks purchase it or process it or do things with it, that's when you move into that commercial zone and would need a permit for that. And that started in January. So under MALCRSA, we essentially have 3 levels of government that are running the show. So the BCC, Bureau of Cannabis Control, that is, I guess, in some ways the largest of the 3, or they cover the number of license types. CDFA is going to be food and ag, and then public health, covering your manufacturing license. CDFA is cultivation. So BCC, again, is the lead agency. If you're into distribution, any type of retail, including delivery, you want to do a micro business, open a lab, or run an event, this is the bureau that you would want to be reading up on. It's a lot of reading to be had there. CDFA, here this is for cultivators. One of the big things coming out right now is the track and trace system. I shouldn't say coming out, but kind of being put into place, and the bugs are being worked out. Track and trace is huge. Distribution, I would argue, is the central piece of the cannabis industry in terms of the supply chain. Nothing goes from one place to the other without distribution. Either you have that distribution permit yourself, or you found a distributor, or the end person that you're giving it to has a distribution license. But nothing moves, it doesn't get tested, the taxes don't move, nothing happens without distribution, so that is pretty critical. Manufacturers going through public health. Amber has some experience with manufacturing. I don't know if there's any highlights or wonderful things from that department you want to share. But
testing.
Yeah, the testing requirements are, all of the requirements are strict, from down to how potent your product can be, to how it is labeled, to where it goes. Everything is strict. So being in compliance here is really key, especially when we're talking about public safety. So do I need to be licensed? I think we've kind of answered that question. If you are bringing commercial cannabis into the market, the answer is yes. Are there restrictions on the type of license that I can have? Honestly, the only real restriction is if you are going to be into the testing aspect of the supply chain. So if you're testing, I think it goes without saying, you are not really allowed to hold a cultivation license, test all of your own flower, and get it out there with 50% THC results. Not that anyone would do that. But that is the only real exemption from holding other licenses if you're going to be into testing. Alright, so this is a lot of words to kind of say that we are wrapping up on the end of 2018 here. Temporary licenses are pretty much expiring December 31st. So January is going to be a really crucial and critical time of transition for us in California, because it is really that time to have your permit or not. And it runs alongside the truth of the matter is you are not protected by medicinal laws to that extent anymore that you were 2018 and prior. And so if you are going to be doing commercial activity, you need to be very careful understanding what your risks are, especially if you are anticipating staying in the medicinal market and not moving into the adult use commercial. If you're still using kind of that collective structure that we've used for many years, it's possibly time to reconsider that and really do your due diligence and figure out what structure works best for you. So we've talked a bit about license types. Another piece that I would just talk about that's important in that is the definition of an owner, which was kind of at that bottom line, the last slide. So if you have a financial interest in one of these companies, or someone does, or you're making decisions about this company, you have a say in what's going to happen, you are likely considered an owner. Despite how much equity you may actually have, it may be 1% or 2%, and you want to be really careful about that if you are participating to understand what your liabilities are, because you will now be listed as an owner of this cannabis entity, and that information is public. So you do want to make sure that if you are, maybe we're all past that point where we have accepted the risk and we're like, yay, go cannabis, but it is a real thing for folks to consider if you are, receiving federal income in any way, all kinds of different implications that you just want to be aware of so that you're making the right decisions. So again, compliance with local jurisdiction. I said this is kind of the first step. If I were going to take this whole kind of presentation and wrap it up into 5 buckets, I would say this is your first bucket, local, right? So you're going to get to know your local jurisdiction, you're going to go to the city hall meetings, you're going to be involved, you're going to know the local jurisdiction and understand what the tax rates are. I mean, every single piece is going to affect your business. It makes a very big difference getting a permit somewhere that has a 2% tax rate and somewhere that has a 12% tax rate. It may kill your margins. So that's something to consider that's very different from a non-cannabis startup, is something as simple as your tax rate in the local area that you're going to be. Also, that local jurisdiction may just have caps. You may have this great idea to open a retail store in X city, and guess what? They only allowed 3, and those 3 were already chosen. So you just want to make sure that your model fits in with the local jurisdiction that you want to be a part of. I would argue that the second bucket behind that is your team. So external and internal. You're going to have your internal team be strong, your CEO, your CFO, however you structure that, but also your external team, your lawyers. Maybe your IP lawyer, your corporate lawyer, your land use lawyer. You want to have a relationship with the planning department, going back to that, that first one. All of those folks become part of your team. Third bucket, I would say probably your real estate and capital within that location. So once you've decided on a city, I love Oakland, great, tax rate works, you got your permit, yada yada. But can you afford the real estate there? Because that's another piece, which is the green zones. It becomes very difficult. Not only do you need to find a willing landlord, someone to give you permission, that landlord might want profit sharing. That landlord might want twice the rent that it was advertised as before they found out that you were doing cannabis. So finding out your real estate and what what capital will be required to get that building up to speed. If you're sitting through a 1-year CUP process and you have to pay rent of $30,000 a month before you can make a dollar, that's a big deal. So you need to understand your real estate requirements, not only in paying the rent, but in getting it up to code. You're cultivating, wall to wall, lights just, blown all the way throughout, and you don't have a room for storage and for, employee break room and all the things that are now required based on compliance. Well, now you're $100,000 in just to get that same grow room up to where it needs to be. If I was going to do, let's see, I said 5 buckets, that was 3. 4, let's say marketing and branding, I would say is another big one. I can't tell you how many times folks have put money into labeling and packaging and a website and email, only to find out they can't protect that name. And you essentially are starting from scratch. So again, in mentioning that IP attorney, doing something as simple as a search on the name that you want to use is critical. It will save you a lot of money in the long run. But also, just to be honest, we're going to see a wave of lawsuits and just all kinds of things going on. After this kind of startup phase, it's going to happen eventually. So last bucket, your finances, your financial statements. Having financial statements, having a profit and loss, income statement, whatever, a balance sheet, does not matter if you don't understand the model that you have and where it is located. So if you're telling me you're going to run a dispensary that's got, 12% margins at the end of the day, you're walking home with this great profit, that might sound great, but if you haven't done the other work in understanding what your competition is, what the locals are wanting and needing, and all of these other pieces, then that profit and loss statement means nothing to me. Neither does the valuation of the company or anything else, because you haven't ticked all the other boxes that are showing who's on your team and how much are you going to have to pay them on all the other pieces that go before you even do any finances. So those are kind of my 5-step summary of jumping into the business in 5 steps. So some important notes just from a compliance standpoint. We talk about property, but within that property, you have what's called a premise. So this is how we get around, possibly sharing spaces with other folks, coming together to get a large warehouse and splitting it up, because each of those is individually licensed as a premise. And so that premise is going to be what has to meet compliance and have a permit. So 1 license, 1 premise. Because the exception is if you're doing adult use and medicinal use. Also would be micro business. So if you're doing, cultivation, manufacturing, and delivery all in 1 premise, that would be okay under the regulations of the micro business rules, right? And there are restrictions on how large your canopy size can be. You can't do volatile, things like that. So these are just some other real highlights. A big one that is pretty much anywhere you go is going to have something about sensitive use areas. Those are usually daycares, youth centers, K through 12, etc. Here it's 600 feet. Some places it's smaller or less than that. I think is San Francisco 600? Yep. They are 600. Okay. And landowner permission, right? So whoever is owning that premise, that property, making sure that they are completely on board with what you are doing, that you are completely honest with them. This is cannabis. We're not trying to tell them 2 years later because they'll be asked and they have to sign off actually in order for you to get that permit. Last piece here is a bond. A lot of folks don't realize having a bond. I mean, for cannabis, in California, we're pretty lucky. I have seen in other states where the bond is considered so high risk that you have to have more than the 10% that's usually required. So we're pretty lucky here. It's about 10% of that, 5,000. That was it. All right.
So to follow Supernova, come to our events. Follow hashtag Stay Woke, Supernova Women. We can also be found on Instagram and Twitter. We're having a First Friday Mixer at EVB in downtown Oakland this Friday. We're hosting it with MCBA, and it's open to people of color as well as our allies. We'll just be mixing and chilling downtown Oakland, smoking on the rooftop. And also a little bit about Supernova. Just want to shout out my other co-founders, Sunshine Lencho in the back. She's the attorney on the board. We have Isa Marie Perez right there, and Isa's our techie person. And then there's me. I'm the former COO of Magnolia Oakland. I'm actually applying for 2 dispensaries in San Francisco. We've got Andrea holding down the consulting and financial piece, and she is CEO of Tulip and Oak. So thank you.